On a quiet stretch of Route 16 near Fayetteville, West Virginia, a billboard stood for nearly 4 decades. 5 solemn-faced children gazed out at passing motorists alongside a haunting question: what was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive? This is the story of the Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, who vanished on Christmas Eve, 1945, in one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. George Sodder wasn't always George Sodder. Born Giorgio Soddu in Sardinia, Italy, he came to America as a 13-year-old boy in 1908, arriving alone after his older brother unexpectedly returned to Italy. The ambitious teenager found work on Pennsylvania railroads before moving to West Virginia. There, he built a successful trucking business and met Jenny Cipriani, another Italian immigrant. They married and had 10 children between 1923 and 1943. The Sodders were respected members of the Fayetteville community. George was known for his strong opinions, particularly his vocal criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which sometimes led to heated arguments with other Italian Americans in town. But on Christmas Eve, 1945, the family's peaceful life would be shattered forever. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. George and Jenny Sodder and 9 of their 10 children were at home on Christmas Eve. Their son Joe was away serving in the military. The younger children begged to stay up later than usual to play with their Christmas gifts, a request their parents granted. Around midnight, Jenny sent them to bed while she remained downstairs with her older daughter Marion. Shortly after, the telephone rang. Jenny answered to hear an unfamiliar woman asking for someone who didn't live there. Strange laughter and clinking glasses echoed in the background. After hanging up, Jenny noticed something odd. The downstairs lights were still on, the curtains open, and the front door unlocked. She secured the house and went to bed, unaware these would be the last moments of normalcy her family would ever know. Around 1 a.m., Jenny was awakened by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling noise. She drifted back to sleep, only to be jolted awake 30 minutes later by heavy smoke pouring into her bedroom. "Fire!" she screamed. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., managed to escape the burning house. But Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty remained trapped inside. George Sodder frantically tried to reach his 5 missing children. He broke a window, slicing his arm in the process, but couldn't see through the thick smoke and flames that had consumed the entire first floor. He raced outside to retrieve the ladder he always kept against the house, but it was mysteriously missing. His next idea was to drive one of his 2 coal trucks up to the house and climb on top to reach the second-floor windows. But despite working perfectly the day before, neither truck would start. Meanwhile, Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but couldn't get an operator to respond. Another neighbor also tried calling from a nearby tavern. Again, no answer. Eventually, someone drove into town to alert Fire Chief F.J. Morris directly. But by the time firefighters arrived at 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire began, the Sodder home had been reduced to ashes. In the immediate aftermath, George and Jenny believed the worst, that their 5 children had died in the flames. The coroner's office quickly issued death certificates listing the causes as fire or suffocation. A state police inspector declared the cause to be faulty wiring, and Fire Chief Morris suggested the intense heat had completely cremated. George covered the basement with 5 feet of dirt, intending to create a memorial for his lost children. But something didn't feel right. During a brief search on Christmas Day, no humans were found, and as Marion later told reporters, "During the fire, I kept watching the windows, but I never saw one of the children. I never smelled burning. They say you can smell miles away, but I never did." Soon the grieving parents began to wonder, were their children really dead, or had something far more sinister happened that Christmas night? As the Sodders reflected on the tragedy, disturbing patterns emerged. Several strange incidents had occurred in the months leading up to the fire. A man had appeared at their home asking about hauling work. While there, he pointed to the family's fuse boxes and ominously warned, "This is going to cause a fire someday," despite the wiring having just been inspected and approved. Another man tried selling the family life insurance and became enraged when George declined. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke," he threatened, "and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." Family members recalled seeing a car parked nearby in the days before Christmas, its driver intently watching the younger Sodder children walking home from school. And then there were the peculiarities of the fire itself. If the blaze was electrical, why were the lights still working during the fire? Why couldn't George's truck start? Where was the family's ladder? What was the loud noise on the roof before the fire? And most disturbing of all, how could a fire, no matter how intense, leave absolutely no trace of 5 children? Jenny Sodder couldn't accept that fire could completely destroy human beings. She conducted her own experiments, burning animal bones to see if they would be consumed. Each time, charred bones remained. The family learned that a crematorium typically burns for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees, yet still has afterward. Their house had reportedly burned in just 45 minutes. More strange details accumulated. A telephone repairman told the Sodders their phone lines appeared to have been cut, not burned. A witness claimed to have seen a man stealing equipment from George's trucks during the fire equipment that could have disabled them. Sylvia, the youngest child, found a hard rubber object in the yard that George identified as a pineapple bomb, potentially explaining the thud they heard on the roof. Then came the most startling development. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the children after the fire. A woman claimed she spotted them in a passing car while the fire was still in progress. Another woman said she served them breakfast at her tourist stop the morning after the fire, noting they were with adults in a car with Florida license plates. A hotel worker in Charleston reported seeing 4 of the 5 children a week after the fire, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction who became hostile when she tried speaking to the children. In 1947, the Sodders appealed to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who said he could only help with permission from local authorities, permission that was denied. The family hired private investigator Cece Tinsley, who uncovered disturbing connections. The insurance salesman who had threatened George was a member of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire accidental. He had previously worked for George and had secretly increased the family's insurance policy before the fire. Tinsley also discovered that Fire Chief Morris had supposedly found a human organ in the ashes and buried it in a dynamite box at the scene. When the Sodders dug up the box, a funeral director examined its contents and determined it was beef liver, completely untouched by fire. Even more suspiciously, rumors circulated that Morris had planted the liver himself, hoping to stop the Sodders' investigation. The family erected a billboard on Route 16, offering a reward for information, initially $5,000 and later increased to $10,000. They distributed flyers and investigated countless leads, with George traveling across the country pursuing possible sightings of his children. More than 20 years after the fire, in the late 1960s, Jenny received an envelope postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. On the back was written, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Elil boys. A 90,132 or 35. The man in the photo bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis, who was 9 when he disappeared. The same dark curly hair, brown eyes, and distinctive nose. Even the left eyebrow had the same characteristic tilt. The Sodders hired another detective and sent him to Kentucky to investigate. They never heard from him again. Fearing they might put their son at risk by revealing too much, they simply added the updated image of Louis to their billboard. "It's hard sometimes to get to sleep at night, just wondering about them," George told reporters in 1968. "After all, if someone wanted to get me, why did they get my family too?" George Sodder died in 1969, still searching for answers. Jenny continued wearing black as a sign of mourning until her own death in 1989, when the weathered billboard finally came down. The surviving Sodder children and their descendants never stopped investigating. Various theories emerged. Was it a local mafia vendetta against George for his anti-Mussolini stance? Had someone entered the unlocked door that night, told the children about the fire, and offered to take them somewhere safe? If the children had survived, if that really was Louis in the photograph, Why had they never contacted their parents? Sylvia, the youngest survivor of the fire, maintained until her death in 2021 that her siblings had escaped the flames. But as her daughter Jenny Henthorne noted, "Anybody who knew what happened would have been my grandparents' age. If the children wanted to be found later on in life, they would have reached out." The mystery of the Sodder children remains one of America's most baffling unsolved cases. 5 children disappeared on a Christmas night in 1945, leaving behind no remains, contradictory evidence, and a trail of strange coincidences. Were they victims of a deliberately set fire? Were they kidnapped as part of an elaborate scheme? Did they somehow survive and live out their lives under different identities? We may never know the truth of what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder. Their story has faded from the public consciousness, just as their billboard eventually came down from Route 16. But their mystery endures, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most disturbing questions are those that remain forever unanswered.